Good evening and welcome to another episode of White Noise, Geek Culture and a Whole Lot More. I'm your host Andrew Higdon, and with me tonight is the awesome Sam Lawless.
Howdy, howdy.
I'm Eric Stronsky.
And I'm back, Scott Mouton.
Excellent. We got a full house tonight. My favorite time of the week now. Getting together with these guys and talking about what we care about. And tonight we have a really good episode planned out. We're going to take a break from Star Wars and Star Trek and sci-fi in general and talk about one of our other favorite properties, Lord of the Rings. The differences between the books, the movies, everything about them. I'm sitting here looking at copies of The Hobbit in Lithuanian, among other various items. There's about 30, 40 books here, all on Tolkien's work, and not all on the Lord of the Rings, but quite a few things. Things like J.R.R. Tolkien, poems and stories.
Yeah.
And the Lord of the Rings in some language I have no idea about.
Polish.
Polish. There you go. Now I can read Polish.
Everybody needs to read it in Polish.
Yes.
So take it away, Sam.
Well, it's kind of hard to know where to begin. I've been a Tolkien fan since I was probably 6 years old, listening to The Hobbit on a recorded book, from the library, and just really getting into the story, the quest, the humor. The Hobbit is a very funny book.
Oh, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
And it's amazing the wide audience that can get into it, right? You can be a young kid and you get it, and then you're a teenager, you read it, you can love it, you get a little bit more. Every time you go through it, there's more to dig into, and it's like that, and that's like the definition of a classic. You just keep mining it. And so, I mean, I don't know how many times I've read The Hobbit, but it's kind of a lifelong thing. And that's, of the mythic work, it's a pretty small slice, and it's kind of just like a one-off. When Tolkien wrote it, The Hobbit was not exactly integrated into the larger work. He's been writing Silmarillion stuff since he was, young, 20 years old or so, developing these stories, and could never get them published. And so The Hobbit, he essentially recycles a lot of the ideas and the concepts, things like Elrond, Gondolin, all these ancient facets in the story. But if you look at it with the Silmarillion, it's not exactly integrated at that time of publication. What happened was, while he's writing Lord of the Rings, all of a sudden the floodgates come open, and then it all comes together, and then you find out just what a great job at retcon Tolkien can do with his own work. And so then everything starts coming together. He starts reconciling stuff and reworking stuff, and so then you see the whole vision as it develops, and it's like the perceived depth that he put into The Hobbit by having references to Gondolin, to the elves and their ancient feud with the dwarves and all this stuff, all that, the perception of depth there becomes actual depth when it's integrated back into the Silmarillion.
But didn't he write The Lord of the Rings for his son, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, well, he wrote like The Hobbit was for his kids, and then Lord of the Rings was for his kids. But what happened was his kids grew up, and so while he's writing it, the tone starts shifting because his kids are older, and there are letters to his publisher where he's like, it's turning out quite differently. The Hobbit's growing up. And so you can see that kind of in The Hobbit itself. The first, 9 chapters or so have a distinctly younger targeted tone. And then you kind of get into the geopolitics of the Lonely Mountain, the dwarves from the Iron Hills, the Mirkwood. They all start coming together, and you go, wait a minute, this doesn't really feel like a kid's story anymore.
No, it does not.
Right? And then you have kind of the Bilbo playing the diplomat / double agent, and it's like, whoa, this we've kind of left the treasure hunt behind. And so it makes a very natural transition into Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Anyway.
Yeah.
Sam could go on, obviously.
This
all
is
night
why I
about this.
didn't prepare for this episode.
I did a little study.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've also been a big fan of Lord of the Rings for a long time. And for me, it's where you really get to see kind of the birth of modern fantasy. You get to see what Tolkien was doing with The Hobbit, and what he then transitioned into with Lord of the Rings. Really gives rise to it ties together what were the contemporary at the time kind of science fiction stories that were the closest thing to real fantasy then, with the old fairy tales and the myths and the legends, and ties it all together into this epic fantasy that most everyone who writes fantasy since then has tried to emulate. And so you really get a sense of, the birth of a genre from Lord of the Rings, because so much of what he does ended up being the standard, where you get things like how orcs are perceived came from Lord of the Rings. How elves are perceived came from Lord of the Rings.
Which is crazy.
World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
It came from
Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
all of it springs from.
And it all ties back to, and of course, a lot of people are doing new and original things with it, and
George
trying.
R. Martin.
Yeah, and you get kind of this, expansion. The genre has grown since Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, but it all can trace back to there, which is just a really fascinating, for me, kind of study in just what it takes, what kind of literature it takes to redefine how people see stories. Because, you don't get that often. It's rare to see a story be so iconic in the way it's perceived that it spawns an entire genre of effectively copycats.
Yeah.
One fun example of just how much of an influence it has on that in Fellowship of the Ring, they're on the Barrow Downs, and the hobbits are captured by Barrow Wights, right?
Mm-hmm.
And since then, in Dungeons and Dragons, you'll find Wight is a monster, right? And it's this undead spirit kind of thing, and it's terrifying, and it's awful. But Wight is just, it's an Anglo-Saxon word meaning dude.
Isn't it?
It means like person, like guy or dude. And so Barrow Wight was a grave dude, right? It's a guy in a grave.
Wow.
And he uses it in one of Eomer's lines in Rohan, right? Eomer asks Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli, "Are you elvish wights?" Right? Are you elves? Are you elf dudes? And they're like, "Well, one of us is an elf." Right? Yeah. But the perception it was, people writing, they didn't know that. And so they're like, "Ooh, Barrow Wight. That's cool.
That sounds cool.
I'm going to use that."
Right.
And it's a dude. And it's like, that makes it very easy to trace where that came from. So,
As someone that's fairly new into the whole genre, in fact, I hadn't read the books. I hadn't even heard of it before the first movie came out.
Same. I was the same. I never even heard of it. Never.
It was the first movie came out, and after the first movie had come out, I hadn't actually seen it. Well, then when I realized it was a big 3-part series, I thought, well, I'm just going to wait for them to finish. So I actually never saw the movies in the theater because
Scandalous.
I didn't think I could have the wait time in between because I knew I would want to get into it, and I felt like that would ruin it for me, or I feel like I wouldn't be able to. I'm kind of a completist in a way.
Yeah.
So I feel like
I didn't want to go through the agony of waiting like
wait,
the rest of us.
Yeah. So I'm impatient.
I just read the book. After I went and saw that first movie, I just read the book.
And my wife and I are now reading the books for the first time. So we're on the 3rd book right now. We're getting pretty close to the end. It's been taking about a year because we read it at night. So the hobbits have been traveling for a long time. About real time, actually. It's real time. Yeah. So
Touch on how long it takes.
It's like, hey, it's we start on September 22nd, and then
so that's
get there
about,
sometime.
you get to Weathertop around October the 6th.
And, So it's been really nice, and then finding out how expansive this world is that he had created, and starting out with just his imagination, it's amazing to someone who's just new to this to see that one person created this, not just wasn't a whole team of people, and he did this, at a point in time where that kind of stuff maybe wasn't quite widely accepted, or it was groundbreaking, and so there was a lot of resistance, so coming into this, I've seen the movies. I know this is going to be terrible. I did enjoy The Hobbit. The movie. And after that, we have since read The Hobbit. And that the book is, just that much greater than the movie. The movies were...
They were an exercise
but
in my patience level.
I did enjoy them, though. So, especially when you see the dragon on an IMAX theater.
Cool.
The exchange, the initial exchange, Bilbo and Smaug,
Perfect.
Yeah.
gorgeous, amazing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Whoever
No
was the art
complaints.
director on that?
No complaints.
Yeah. Whoever was the art director on that?
It was amazing. It was
Yeah.
it was just it was a relatively short bit in the larger
Yes,
work.
that is kind of the issue with the Hobbit movies. There were elements that they captured just perfectly. And as you go through the movies, those elements become fewer and fewer and farther apart.
And smaller and smaller percentage.
And so, where you get some of the moments like that in the second one, which was just absolutely fantastic. There are some really good moments in the first one.
Yeah.
in-
No, when he talks to
riddles-
Gollum.
yeah, the
was
riddles
awesome.
in
Yeah,
the
the riddles in the dark.
Fantastic.
Absolutely. And then again, just as there becomes more and more movie, you realize just how much of the movie isn't those scenes. That you feel like, yes, that was it. And it's just kind of, what are they doing?
Right. Yeah. For me, so I followed the Corey Olson, the Tolkien professor, had a fantastic podcast, and that he and some of his friends did a Hobbit movie prediction podcast where they would talk about the book and then make predictions based on what they thought Peter Jackson would do in the films, right? And they did this for each film. And so initially it was really fun. You look at the book, and the sky's the limit of what they could do. And then you get the first movie, it's like, oh, hey, we like these elements. This is interesting. And where are they going with this? Because the setup is pretty good.
The first
Movie
one?
one.
Yeah.
They set up a lot of very interesting things. The homeland, returning to this kingdom. They had very interesting elements. It was much more than a treasure hunt.
Yes.
Right? It was, and it was like,
They made
great.
you care about the dwarves.
Yeah,
They made you
absolutely.
care
Yeah,
about
they,
the
and
characters.
they gave the dwarves personality, right? In the
Yeah.
book, I mean, you get a few personal things about dwarves, and then you kind of have the rest of the dwarves.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because there's 13 of them.
Yeah.
And anyway, so they're working through this, and great. And then the second movie, we start getting some more substantial departures from the book. And it's like, what is, where are they going with this? A lot of unanswered questions. And it's like, well, I mean, for me, watching the film, I was skeptical, but ready to see where they were going to take it, because obviously they were, they had these they had a lot of threads going, and you know, ooh, how are they going to put all this together? And then it's when the third one came out, and they just didn't follow through on the threads, and suddenly the whole production came crashing down. Right?
Yeah.
The setup is great if it has a payoff, but for crying out loud, we didn't even see what happened to the Ark and Snow.
Yeah, it disappears into
The
Bard's
Last
pocket.
Jedi did.
It
just
it went into Bart's pocket. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
I think Bart has it. Yeah, I mean, wait, what?
they never
What?
touch on it again.
What?
Yeah.
Never speak of it.
Yeah, I just recently saw a YouTube video that showed what actually happened to it, because I didn't know at the time before reading the books and all that. So I didn't realize he was buried with it.
Yeah.
But it was just. But I did remember that being kind of a plot hole. Like, Stone just kind of just disappears. And
They cared so much about it for so long, and then all of a sudden we don't care about it.
Yeah.
It's not important.
So that's my brief
Yeah.
take on that. And
If you want a longer one, then
But this podcast is going to be a little longer than Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about my experience with it.
Yeah.
So I grew up in the era of Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons, played both. Loved fantasy. Used to draw pictures and all sorts of things. But I grew up in my early days in that vein. Dragonlance, Dragonlance novels, things like that, or what I read as a kid. And so I don't know how I missed The Lord of the Rings. I don't know how it slipped by me, considering how much of a fan I was of that genre, or genre. But it did. And so, I'm 21, 22, I guess when the first movie came out, somewhere around in there. And a friend of mine's like, oh, the Lord of the Rings movie, it's coming out this week. And I was like, Lord of the Rings what? And he's like, you're kidding me, right? You're kidding me here, you're joking.
What's
like,
wrong with
I'm
you?
like, Lord of the Rings what? And he goes, you just need to come see this movie, Andy. And I was like, okay, I'll go. So opening weekend, there, sitting there, watching Lord of the Rings. And it just blew my mind, dude. Like,
I
it
can't
blew my mind.
imagine.
Seeing all that for the first time. I was like, this
an
is the greatest.
experience.
This has got to be the greatest
Yeah.
thing ever, and it was. It was. So I immediately went out and bought the books because I had to know how it ended.
Right,
I mean, like,
right.
I couldn't
You
sit
didn't
here
wait
and
for a year to get the second part.
No, it was like I think I read the Lord of the Rings, all of them, the trilogy, including the first one, the first book. I read them in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
And that's in between school and all sorts of other stuff.
That's
Girlfriends and
GPA tanks, but you
but I got
through the book.
I did not pass math that year, but I got through the book. So yeah, I was immediately hooked. For me, the second movie wasn't near as good as the book itself, and then the third one. I think it's a lot like what we're talking about with The Hobbit to me. I think the first movie is great. They did a real great job. And then I think some of the things that they did in the last two kind of took away from it, especially when you're comparing it to the book.
The Corsairs at the end.
They were a little interesting.
That whole scene is completely different than from the books.
Oh
yeah.
I'm just talking about the ending, okay?
Yeah.
We did not have any Raising of the Shire, okay? And so, when they didn't do that, I was pissed. So pissed.
Yeah.
don't listen to this, Scott.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Sorry.
I've seen enough YouTube videos and enough podcasts. I know what's coming up. But
They didn't do that. They didn't do that. Yeah, I agree.
I'm past the point of saying spoiler alert.
Right.
Well, you've seen the
Right.
last movie, so you know that.
Yeah.
It basically.
My interaction with the movie was different than that because, of course, I was already a fan. I knew the story,
knew the story.
frontwards and backwards. So I go to the theater, and I'm what? When did that come out? 2099? 2000?
2001?
2001. Yeah, I was.
Yeah. So 14 years old, and so I watch it, right, and my Tolkien purist critical mind is like, the visuals were amazing, but they messed this up, and they did. And I had to hold it. Right, me and my my literary critic chair, and then as a 14-year-old, right? Sure, absolutely, and this is my favorite book, and then I got the extended DVD collection with the behind the scenes,
which was good,
and I watched every minute of content. I mean, I watched the Greens Department audio commentary. It just and so getting the picture of what did it take to make this, as well as how are they adapting book to film. That was my first real introduction to hey, it's a different medium and you got to do different things.
You got to. You can't. You cannot make a film.
You can't just can't just go straight over. And so it was a clinic on film production and on story adaptation. And so I just ate it up. And so by the time I got to the second film, right, where you do get more obvious departures, right, and characters are different. I mean, saying all that, it's not that I didn't still have issues with the first movie, but they were in a different context. So then in the theater, very different experience watching Two Towers. One, it was like, okay, I don't like what they're doing here. I don't like what they're doing here, but I'll give them some credit. They know at least what they're trying to do. And so it was an interesting learning experience, kind of in charity, toward to get through. Okay. And then now, right? So then I kind of held my judgment. Your
expectations
aren't... And then the third one comes out, and it's like, okay, now I can assess the whole. And there's still lots of things that, like, I don't care for, what Faramir. I didn't like Treebeard. So some of these
they didn't
things
look right
through here.
To me. They didn't look right.
Yeah, but on the whole, I was like, okay, this was the cinematic achievement they did with such a beloved property, right? The expectations for a relatively unknown director. Nobody had seen a movie coming out of New Zealand, right?
Right.
What a workshop! These guys, nobody heard of them, and they deliver. In a huge way. The way they met expectations and exceeded them is practically unprecedented.
I think that it's been duplicated.
I think the only thing that comes close to that level of expectations versus delivery would be Infinity War.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought they did a really good job of that. I grew up reading those comics.
Yeah.
So.
And even that, we're still kind of waiting to see if it's true or not.
True.
Because really what we have is the setup.
Yep.
And so we're still waiting to see what is the payoff. So again, like the Hobbit movies, the setup is fantastic. But we still need them to deliver with the payoff.
Right. I want to, if the Infinity Stones goes into somebody's jacket and you never find out what happens to them, I'm going to be a little disappointed.
Yeah.
Bard shows up, takes the stone, sticks it in his coat, and that's it.
Obviously, safest place in the universe.
I remember, I don't want to get off topic or anything, but I watched the Infinity War, and it left me depressed. It left me really with a bad taste in my mouth. And then I went back after it came out on DVD or Blu-ray and watched it again. And I had a lot better appreciation for it because I knew where it was going.
Right.
The first time I was like, Spider-Man died.
Sorry,
spoiler alert. But
what? Listen, if you're listening to a nerd podcast and you haven't seen Infinity War, it's your own fault.
Yeah. Exactly. So it got a little emotional, to see everybody die, So.
Which is incredible considering they had 40 characters on screen,
something
like that, and you feel stuff about people dying.
Yeah, but it's going to be expensive to make the next movie. They might have to cut some of these characters out.
That's
true. That's why. It was a financial
it's
thing.
Totally possible. Anyway, that's
yes.
so anyway, but just the level of
Going back to
to Lord of the Rings, the production, and that's what got me into filmmaking. I mean, totally. It's like I want.
Is that
I
real?
want.
Was that
Yeah,
real?
yeah. That was it. I want to do that.
I want to make things that people care about like that.
Yeah. I want to shoot, and that turned into like I was very interested in the miniatures because for example, so I'm podcast. I do stop motion, and so seeing how they shot the miniatures using miniature photography paired with live action and CG elements to create this hybrid that has so much realistic effects because a lot of it is actually real. It's like those are real background plates, those are real elements they shot. And then comparing that to like the Hobbit stuff where everything's CG. And everything's CG. And you look at that and you go, there's something just not quite right. It doesn't have the same
Practical effects, man.
It doesn't have the weight.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like there's a certain weight. Well, next gen, Star Trek Next Gen. The shots of the Enterprise look good.
Still,
How does it look good? Still,
Yeah,
it's because it's a miniature.
Exactly.
Yeah, but like you were saying with practical effects, I mean, look at the difference between Lurtz, the Uruk-hai at the end of Fellowship of the Ring, and Azog, the CG villain of the Hobbit trilogy. And yes, Azog is bigger and imposing and all of these things, but he doesn't look real.
Right.
He's a CG character, and he looks like a CG character.
He's not visceral. He's
not like, oh my gosh, no.
Whereas, I mean, for Lurtz, when he's got, the Aragorn sword.
He looks like he'll bite your hand off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Vigo is freaking out.
Yeah.
Because the dude is scary, and he's right there.
And he's big.
He's really big.
Yeah, but you get the sense that Aragorn, while he's fighting him, is not really thinking. Like he's just, he's
I think he did a really good job. Kind of that.
Blind.
When like you're running and you don't have enough oxygen and you all you know is you got to keep going. That's what it looks like when he's fighting.
Oh yeah, totally.
Right?
Yeah.
It's kind of in that stupor of just keep.
Yeah.
My adrenaline's the only thing
that's the only thing keeping me.
Which may have been responsible for all the stunt people he hurt.
Yes, that could very well be. That could be.
What's the story?
Go ahead.
No,
you.
I insist. No.
Well, the story that I like is when it's the end of Fellowship of the Ring, and Aragorn has just let Frodo go, right? And he turns around, and there are like 40 Uruk-hai coming up the hill, right? And that's the scene in the movie. And when they're shooting that, they have Richard Taylor, who's the props manager, and he is coaching the Uruk-hai, and he's telling them about that they are ruthless, and they all they want blood, and they have one goal, and that is to kill. And Viggo Mortensen is standing there. There are 40 of these guys going, they are going to kill me right now. I'm going to die on set. It's like, shut up, Richard. These guys don't need any help.
They look imposing.
They are terrifying.
Yes.
Wow.
What about the new series that Amazon is apparently?
Yeah.
Grab that out, man. Grab that out.
There we go.
So I haven't been able to find hardly anything on it. So have y'all?
Besides the announcement, no.
Yeah.
What do y'all?
What I have heard is, and again, not very much. It's going to take place during the time of a young Aragorn. So this is going to be like post The Hobbit, but pre Lord of the Rings. So during that 60-year period.
It's not gonna have Morrison in it now. Yeah.
No.
As Aragorn?
No.
No.
Recast him.
Yeah. And so, but yeah, it's a series, and it's set to compete with or
At this point, kind of replace.
kind of replace like
Game of Thrones and
type.
yeah, it's the thing Amazon wanted to be their series. Like HBO had Game of Thrones for all this time. Amazon wants to have something that is that for them.
Yeah.
Property.
Yeah.
That property that they can really just run with it and expect that people are going to want to be like part of Prime to come and see that, whether they need Prime for anything else or not.
Right. That's their big selling point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Plus the 2-day free shipping.
but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, too. And music and the movies.
We're all
and-
spokesmen.
Yeah.
No, we're not.
But
Audible does not support our podcast. Okay, we should get that out there.
not a sponsor.
They're welcome to do so, but they don't yet.
If they'd like to, then
Yeah, I could be reached it.
Yeah. Right. And that is basically what I've heard about that.
yeah, it's really been pretty tight-lipped so far.
Yeah,
Yeah. But I mean the scope is huge. I mean they could do
go on
so
for
many
whatever
things,
they want.
right?
Well,
I mean,
Is there any written history?
yeah.
Okay.
There's quite a
In
quite a
between
bit
time.
during that time. So things like following Aragorn, so he had his 87th birthday when he met Gandalf the White coming back.
Was it 87 or was that at
It
88?
might have been 88.
I think he was 87
Yeah,
before that
right.
and turned 88
Right.
at that scene.
So he's fairly old, and he's been working towards, defeating Sauron and as becoming the king for his whole life.
Yeah.
And so,
but I thought he didn't want that.
Oh.
he doesn't want it in the movie.
Okay,
In the book, no, that is
is his goal.
let's go.
That is his thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was
The Return of the King.
probably my biggest beef against the movies
Mm-hmm.
was that shift.
Was
Um,
Elrond saying,
He turned
from
it
yeah.
back. I'm like,
And they have to,
what are
yeah,
you
the
doing?
reluctant
What are you-
hero.
I know,
Yeah.
I know. Which Hollywood thinks you have to do. Hollywood thinks you can't because you can't have apparently an epic character, right? And they're right. Aragorn in the books is not relatable. I don't know anybody like that.
Mm-hmm.
That's because he's an
Yeah.
he's an epic character. He's an archetype.
Yeah.
I don't relate to him. I relate to the little characters.
Which was purposeful.
Literally, the short people.
That was purposely done. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is why the whole thing is written from 3 feet high. Right. That we get the hobbits so that we can appreciate the great characters like Aragorn, Galadriel,
Gandalf.
Yeah.
right? And Gandalf has this great condescension, right, where he takes an interest in the little things, and Sauron's like, what are you doing?
Wasting
why are you
your
doing
life
this?
away,
Yeah,
man.
exactly. What's the point? And can I have some of that pipe weed, please? But anyway, but yeah, Aragorn's he rode with Theoden's dad, Thengel. He rode in Rohan then. He went down to Gondor, and he fought the Corsairs. He under when Denethor was kind of establishing his stewardship, right? Aragorn was perceived as a rival, right? He was a big enough deal as a leader of men and this hero, right? The heroic warrior comes in that Denethor is worried about it, and then he disappears because it's not time yet.
Yeah.
And so and he goes off into the east. He's been everywhere.
Yeah.
You get
And
that
so-
sense in the movies.
Yeah, yeah. He's the greatest traveler. I mean, yeah. He is just. And so scope for the series, they can do whatever they want.
Yeah. Look
Right?
at all the options we
get
just got
outlines,
listed.
right? We get outlines, but we don't get details.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So they can fill in the details and do
Fill in
whatever they want.
details.
Yeah.
Make a good story. I
I don't
I
care
am
as long as you make a
perfectly
good story.
Yeah, make it a good story. I'm in.
Good writing.
Yeah.
Good writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Just don't make it like Game of Thrones, where everybody gets killed for no apparent reason.
Yeah. That's not really.
It's not the style of Lord of the Rings.
Style.
No.
Yeah.
Right.
I've never read anything like
Except
Game of
Wars.
Thrones ever. You know, like
Yeah. I tell you, I still get chills when you get Death of Boromir on screen.
oh man,
It tears me up.
Yeah, but
That- I mean, when you go, oh yeah, I don't like how they did this. I don't like how they did this, or whatever. But you go, yeah, but honestly, Boromir's death in the movie, it's
meaningful.
better. I mean, it's better than the book in
Yeah.
that it does the same thing that the book does.
But it's how it's
But
shown.
then you get all the you get music.
right.
You get
The
you know,
arrows thumping into
the
him,
facial
you know,
expression, the
yeah.
acting. I
Yeah.
mean, nobody dies like Sean Bean.
exactly.
Nobody. I can't like remember what the count is. It's like in the 30s that he's died on screen. You know, it's
Yeah.
like, we're gonna hire him to kill it.
Yeah, but I mean, they did a great job. I mean, with
Yeah.
like
Yes.
Vigo coming in, and so you have Aragorn and Boromir, and Aragorn takes, he essentially assumes both his job and Boromir's job. It's like, no, listen, I got to defend Gondor, and I got to defend the hobbits. It really makes the choice for do we go after Sam and Frodo? Do we go after Merry and Pippin? Do I go to Gondor and do my job? It makes it a really tough choice for him because Boromir's not there to go to Gondor.
Yeah.
Which is in the books too.
In the books, he was forcing.
It's
he was
in
kind
the
of pushing
books
them in
too,
that direction.
but you really get it in the movie.
I don't know
Yeah.
if I liked the versus the book versus the movie. Boromir trying to take the ring. In the book, it is very visceral and like
Yeah.
like he has lost
Yeah.
his mind.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah,
Rings.
well, and part of that is just the development
Mhm.
in the psychology in the book is a lot easier because you can get a narrator saying what's going on. You
Yeah.
can get a more of a sense for
A little closer into Boromir's mind, his thought process.
Yeah, that's the difference
right,
between book and movie.
and you can spend more time. And that exactly, that's just book versus movie,
Yeah.
as a medium. I thought they did a pretty good job. It felt kind of obvious. I feel like you didn't get a nuanced
Yeah.
view of why Boromir, like why he wanted the ring, or in what way exactly he was
Why
tempted.
he was trying to go
Yeah.
to
For the
Gondor,
ring.
like
Yeah.
You didn't really get all that, but I mean, there's screen time and there's
Yeah.
a
It
lot
was a
of considerations.
3 to 4 hour movie with the pretty straightforward version.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So I don't feel bad about that. We got a good, good death for him, and I was happy with the character.
Well, they tell it in backstories, from his
Yeah,
brother.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was an interesting addition too. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's easy, and I know as a young reader of Lord of the Rings, it was easy. Oh, Boromir's a bad guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally was doing
First
that.
time we read through.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
He
He's
was-
a bad guy, right? I mean, he's a threat. He,
Wolfenstein exploding.
yeah,
type.
exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. And then you start reading through it, and you get more of the nuance, and this is how this is working.
His
and I
father
thought,
and
and
pride.
the way they brought that in the movie with the flashback scenes and stuff, I thought really fleshed out his character.
yeah.
And so I again, it's like, wow, great job. I totally see that.
Totally.
I would watch. I would watch stories. Faramir, Boromir,
Yeah.
Just on
defending
yeah.
Gondor. Let's see. Osgiliath.
Yeah.
Let's see these stories. Sure.
Yeah, and win the day, like,
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
they were heroes.
Okay, there's something that has always bothered me a little bit about and this stuck in my mind ever since I watched the first movie. The time between, and it explains it in the book, okay? But the time between Gandalf leaving, after Frodo is given the ring, what is the time frame there? Because it's almost like he goes straight to
Yeah.
Gondor
Yeah.
and then comes straight back, and it's
Right.
been like
Right.
3 or 4 days.
Right.
But it's really been like almost a year or two, right?
So,
Well.
one of the lingering critiques of the way the story works in the films is the handy fast travel feature,
Yeah, the
right?
press
Yeah,
A and travel to location.
exactly.
Yeah.
Once you've
Yeah.
discovered Gondor or Isengard, you can fast travel
Right.
Yeah.
in a couple hours, apparently.
Yeah.
Such that Gandalf in the Shire, oh no, the nine are on their way or whatever. I'll go to Isengard for help. Good luck, Frodo and Sam.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ludicrous, right?
Yeah.
In the books, the time frame on that is like 17 years.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Between so when you have Bilbo's birthday, right? He turns 11, Frodo turns 33, same day, right? Frodo leaves the Shire with the ring when he's 50.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mind blown.
So now in the story, figuring out what Gandalf knows, when he knows it, and what he's doing can be pretty complicated.
Yes.
It is not a straightforward, oh, well, he knows this, and so he does this. You can look at it and go, wow, Gandalf really pooched it. And a lot of people have made this case. Looking at all the factors there, it's quite an intricate story. And largely without going through it all, which would be quite a
Ordeal.
17 years.
Largely what it comes down to, like you get assumptions about just what people know, right? We're a very information age. You can know these things, right? Communication, travel, very
Internet,
easy.
everything.
Back, within that world, who knew about the rings? Like very, very few people,
Yeah.
right? None of this is like accepted lore. This is And so anyway, but yeah. So in the course of that, book version, 17 years go by. Movie version, what?
A couple of hours,
A couple
maybe a
weeks.
day or two.
Maybe a day or two.
Yeah,
It took me a day or two to get to Gondor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, okay.
I was just going to say that I remember reading a little bit about that, and it felt like when the 17-year thing, it felt like he would have to go to Gondor, then he'd have to go here, and then he'd have to go back to Gondor.
Yeah.
And he'd get some information here, or he would hear something from some travelers or something like that, about the strange creature, Gollum, and all that.
Yeah.
And go,
right,
okay, well,
tracking down Gollum.
what does that have to do? And then go here and there, and really trying to figure out, basically researching the ring before the internet. Basically is what he was having to do. He was having to run all over the world trying to find it.
Yeah, well, and not even just before the internet, but before the printing press, before, common literacy even, really. We're talking,
Translating, too.
Yeah, going into, the vaults of Minas Tirith, or wherever, trying to go, okay, and where are the scrolls from, 3,000 years ago?
Right.
Where this thing was last seen.
Exactly. you kind of don't get the sense, especially in the movie, where you get the prologue, and then here we go, we're at the Shire, right? The age difference between prologue events and the Shire, Bilbo's birthday, it's like the difference between now and ancient Egypt.
Really?
Yeah.
And you're going, so how much common knowledge? For crying out loud, what did they know? You had now on the plus side, you had a few people who were there. So, right?
Yeah.
So you have that huge gap in time, and then it's Elrond's like, oh yeah, I remember when this happened. So you have very good information, but from really long ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when do you think Gandalf figured it out?
He figured it out when he put the ring in the fire and the letters showed up. Now, he expected to see them then because of all the legwork he did, right? Because he talked to Gollum. Because he went to Gondor and read, found the ancient, 4,000-year-old documentation on what the ring was like.
Yeah.
Because he did
But
all...
he knew something was wrong when Bilbo couldn't give it up.
Knew something was wrong. Yeah,
Right.
and that's what made him go, look. He's like, oh, this isn't good. Right?
So, okay, if it's been 17 years, why is Frodo never puts it back up, does he? He just puts it in, away? Because it doesn't take hold of him.
Basically, Yeah, basically, it's he's not using it,
Mm-hmm.
and as it turns out, Frodo's an exceptional hobbit.
Yeah.
And you know, who says it? Who thinks Gandalf would consider Gandalf and Bilbo consider him the best hobbit in the Shire?
Oh. I don't remember offhand.
I forget who said that. Anyway, but he's an exceptional hobbit, and so was Bilbo.
Yeah.
But part of the issue there, I think, comes down to as Sauron is exerting his will to draw the ring back, it gets more and more dangerous to hold it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's a very different thing for Bilbo to have the ring in the Shire for 60 years.
Right, and use it regularly.
And use it regularly, and you know it's you know, and obviously that has an effect, and he can't let it go easily, and so on and so forth. But he had it for 60 years. Frodo, he, you know, progressively this was going to be an issue.
Yeah.
Just because the ring was changing, the world was changing. Yeah.
Well, I've already decided that this episode is going to be split into some parts because it looks like we could go on and on and on about this all night. We're still doing great on time, so we can keep at it. I just have a lot of questions, I guess, for you guys because I mean, like, I've never heard all this stuff.
Yeah.
So how long then? Okay, does it take from the time Frodo leaves the Shire? You know, the 17 years kind of thing. How long does it take him to then end up back in the Shire? You know,
it's about a year.
Yeah.
About a year.
It's about a year, right? So when they're coming back through Weathertop, it's about a year since he got stabbed.
Yeah.
And so that's when he feels it.
So that's when he feels it in his shoulder, and he starts to realize that he might not ever get to really go home, right? That some wounds can't be healed.
That he's eventually going to die.
Yeah.
Because of it.
He's gonna gonna have to leave, so yeah, the course of the travel, you know, and they spend several months in Rivendell.
Yeah.
So
I think it's 2 months, something like that.
Something like that.
In Rivendell, and like a month in Lothlorien.
Yeah.
Because, you know, just so travel time, because, you know, but which, you know, several months seems about right in Rivendell. They obviously read the Council of Elrond.
Right.
And that would about account
Several
for
months.
Several months long.
But, yeah.
And then, kind of going back a little bit, this is also kind of what amazes me about how big this world is. And again, when we go back to like the language thing, seeing how he created a pre-language and then the language and then the current language,
Right.
Yeah.
and you know, building that kind of history and having an evolving language. I mean, we have that now. I mean, we have the real world, but it's to create that all on your own. And so that's why, towards me, a lot of this can also start to be overwhelming at times. Right?
Yeah.
Because there's just, where do I go? I jumped into the middle of this.
As a casual fan. You know, like,
Yeah.
I'm not a super fan at all, but I'm a casual fan.
And so where would be the next place to start reading or...
So the great thing
Tell our listeners.
Yeah.
for the new listeners out there,
Yeah.
the great thing about the Tolkien's world is that you can enjoy it at so many levels, right? You come in and you read it for the first time, or you see the movie for the first time, and you're like blown away. This is awesome, and because you can see, you know, behind these characters, it's like, oh, there's a history here, there's a history there, and then but seeing the first look is great, and then you go, okay, I want to know more about this. So you read, you know, you read the Silmarillion, and it's like, oh man, now you see the kind of the bones of the story where these characters came from, or what the world was like, you know, in a previous age, and you go, wow, there's a lot here, and then you can kind of delve into that. Well, how was the Silmarillion put together, right? I mean, he didn't. It's published posthumously, right? Tolkien didn't ever really finish it, and so then then there's the like the History of Middle Earth series where Christopher Tolkien goes through, and it's like, all right, so this was the first draft, or this was one story, and then he changed this, and then he put this, and so in the publication, right? You kind of take the best texts and reconcile them and put them together, and he's documented all of that stuff. And it's like so what at whatever level you've read or are familiar with, there's something for you. You don't have to know everything in order
to be a fan,
to enjoy the story you get. Right?
Yeah.
It's not like it doesn't make any sense unless you know every version or every
You've read the
Right.
Lithuanian version?
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's not actually necessary.
There was some things like also the letters, the Tolkien
Yeah,
letters.
Yeah.
Tolkien's letters. It's so the ones that I've read, I've really enjoyed because he's talking about trying to get it published. Right, getting it published was tough. This is post World War II, Lord of the Rings, and paper is expensive, and so you can't publish it as one volume. You got to publish it in 3 volumes and in big volumes. And, back and forth with the publisher, and they keep, trying to correct his spelling and stuff, and Tolkien doesn't like that, because he's, like that. Tolkien's a total nerd. It's amazing. But what's really humanizing is like, he never expected it to go like this.
Yeah.
Right? No expectation, right? I mean, he's like any author who's like, he's a professor. Right, he's a don at Oxford, and he's just, he has to grade papers. He has to grade papers, and he hates grading papers.
He hates grading
right? And he needs more money, so he teaches classes over the summer. And he's sitting on Lord of the Rings, kind of, not really sitting on it. He needs to write it. He needs to get it out.
It took him so long.
It took forever.
It took forever.
His wife was in poor health. They had to move to the country. Everything upset the writing, right? And so you just, bit by bit getting this out and, changing the story and revising. And so, and there's like no expectation that it's going to be anything other than maybe he can make a little money on the side for his family. And it's like, it's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, not realizing that, not only was it going to, establish, a financial setup for himself, but also for his son. Christopher Tolkien has, spent pretty much his entire adult life just continuing to work on his father's work.
Yeah. And done an amazing job at it.
Yeah.
And we've got so much more information because of all that work.
Yeah.
For one thing, just reading Tolkien's handwriting. Tolkien was terrible. He would take a sheet of paper, write something in pencil, overwrite in pen, and his handwriting is essentially a wavy line.
Like Elvish.
Yeah, which is crazy because he can do calligraphy like nobody's business.
I can tell.
But his handwriting is like, just.
Yeah.
My handwriting's like that. It's an artist writer
And
thing.
so when you're reading Christopher, it's like in this draft and this some word, indecipherable, and then like just have no idea. And in fact, I don't remember what instance this was, but there was a point where in he would publish something and then a subsequent work be, we've since determined that this was this word, and so that changed something. It's like, hey, we found it, like, oh, hey, turns out it's this word. We couldn't read it before, but we can read it now. So, can we talk about Silmarillion a little bit?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know nothing about it.
Most so
Read it,
this,
don't know
so
anything
this
about it.
back to your question on where do you get in, right?
Yeah.
Start with The Hobbit because it came first, It's delightful. It's easy to read. Then go Lord of the Rings because it is the standard in fantasy genre. It has so much depth. It's awesome. The Silmarillion is a different genre, right? Which people find out very quickly. Because you read Lord of the Rings, great. I love this. Hey, there's another book. It's the Silmarillion. You read the first paragraph and go, what is this? It's a completely different genre, and you have to read it like that.
Yes. The first part, especially, of the Silmarillion is not a fantasy story. It is a history book.
It's kind of like the Bible.
It is. It's myth. It's history. It's really, and you have to read it as such. And if your expectations are, I'm going to get a novel, that's not what you get.
No.
So and that really throws people. As you get into it, so that's like the Valaquenta.
Yeah.
And then you get into the Silmarillion proper, then you get stories, and it's like, okay, now we're going to talk about Beren and Luthien, and then we're going to talk about Turambar, and so you get these different stories. You get the Beleriand and its realms, and so essentially what you get is a summary, right? It's like a summary genre that will zoom in at times and give you a close-up look, right?
Yeah.
So you get these, 500 years go by, this is what happens, this is where these people settle, this is where these people settle, these people have a beef with these guys. Okay.
500 more years go by.
Next chapter. In the year, the year after the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, Turin's born. And then you go, okay, and this is his mother, and this is what he said, and this is his father, and his father left and got captured, and then you get like, here's a story about a particular guy that we're going to follow kind of, year by year until he grows up, and we get stories, and we get dialogue, and it's like, oh, okay, now we got something.
Yeah.
And then it'll zoom back out. And so the important thing there is you got to see the patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get, oh, this is the kind of story. So you get Beren and Luthien, and then, you get over to Lord of the Rings, and you go, hey, Aragorn, he's kind of like Beren, isn't he? And so you can kind of trace that through, which you kind of get. But you also get things like, oh, Sam is like Beren too when he's taking on the spider. Or, because Beren came through the Ethel Dueth.
Yeah.
And took on spiders, but you go, oh, he's also like Turin, because he gets up under Shelob with his sword, and he's not strong enough to do anything there, but Shelob sits down on that sword just like Glaurung did on Turin's sword, and you go, okay,
You see the similarities.
and so you get yeah. And it just keeps expanding. So that's really where the Silmarillion can improve your appreciation of things like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. And if you don't feel you're ready to kind of dive into the summary style, the history style of the Silmarillion, they have been going through and taking a lot of the story sections and repackaging them as their own stories. You have the Tale of the Children of Húrin, which is Turambar's story. You have Beren and Luthien is out of the Fall of Gondolin.
Just came
out.
New York Times bestseller.
And they're taking some of these more specific stories and packaging them in a way where you can just go, okay, and that's what this story is.
Right.
And it reads a little bit more like a traditional novel.
Right. and you get all the different versions of the story, because he's developing these stories over the whole course of his life. And you kind of get the development of those stories all together. So you don't have to read 13 volumes of History of Middle-earth and try to remember how the story came through during different periods of his life. And that can help.
Yeah.
we're I guess we're approaching the end of the hour, but I think this discussion is one that we're going to have to take into next week because there seems to be a lot here that we left kind of on the table, so to speak.
Is there any like podcasts or YouTube channels that you'd recommend following?
Sam would know.
I would.
Sam?
Tolkien Professor. Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Puts out a ton of content. They're going through exploring Lord of the Rings right now. Have been for over a year. They're on episode 74, I think, is on the podcast feed now, and have gotten all the way to Weathertop.
Oh, wow.
So we're on
Tolkien Professor.
Yeah.
Tolkien Professor. So on pace there to finish Lord of the Rings, at least by 2030. So that's absolutely, that would be my first and best recommendation.
And if you don't want to go through it quite that slowly, there are some other versions where he goes through it at a faster pace.
Right. Yes. There's some other classes where you go through it in a more reasonable pace.
Really.
Yeah. And which is great, and will really, I really appreciate his approach to reading a text carefully, talking about what's actually in the text, and not ideas that he wants, come bring ideas to the text and see if they agree with him. So, that'd be awesome. That's the place to look.
Cool. Well, I learned a lot tonight, and I hope to learn a lot more in the coming episodes on this topic. So, thank you all so much for being here, and have a good night.
Awesome.
See you.